working on really good projects. Tampa is some pretty cool ones as well. There's not as much activity in Tampa because there's not as much developer, you can say, density there, but I wouldn't say Fort Lauderdale's on a huge radar for developer talent too, so there's definitely opportunities to improve, but that's why the goal of at least our group, our brigade, being one of many all across the US, is to start the dialogue, right? Start a better conversation around the usage of public data, how open source technologies can be used at the city and in private organizations to facilitate shared goals, and basically provide a regular opportunity to have this communication, have this dialogue. So I'm going to go over a couple examples of what the civic hacking examples out in the wild are doing well so far. So if you want to check out opencityapps.org, this is a website for the Chicago Brigade. These are all projects that were created with the use of open data. So open data, if you don't know yet, it's basically spreadsheets that were provided by state, local, government organizations at some capacity where they say, okay, this is the record of all the parks information that we have. This is a record of all the sewers that we have, or in some way they put out a database or a spreadsheet or a file that the public in some capacity can use in a way that's more useful than maybe they providing their own tools or their own website. So the city doesn't always have a priority to build a mobile tool to make it easy to find the best park near you with sweet jumps you can take your bike off of, right? So trying to make things more useful for people in their own communities is what public data can be used for. So here are some examples. First of all, let me back up with the ability to build these projects largely relies on the amount of data you have available, right? So thankfully, at least in the city of Chicago, they're showing an example. This is an open data portal. So this is literally a thing that the city of Chicago has paid a company, actually called Socrata, lots of money to host their own data, to host the city's information and make it more useful for other people. So there is actually an API endpoint. Like technically speaking, you can actually hit this database with things like building permits, affordable rental housing developments, potholes patched in the last 7 days. Maybe you want to make a dashboard of your progress of your own city. How productive are they? Different things that you would need in order to create these things exist in public data, in open data, in reports that are being filed by the state that the taxpayers are paying for. Should we have access to it in some useful way? If it's a spreadsheet that taxpayer money has paid to put out there to record and to host, basically, I would argue that we should have some use of it as well. Some interesting projects that are in Chicago. So you may not be able to read that, but it says, is raw sewage being dumped into the Chicago River right now? So apparently they regularly, based on snowfall and rain and stuff like that, they have to like purge lines and allow for sewage to go out into the Chicago River. So community members in their local brigade learned about this because not many people know about the history of the Chicago River. I didn't know this, maybe you know that they reversed the Chicago River's water flow at one point. I never knew that either, that was pretty wild to hear about. So they created a little website that basically pulls a report that says whether or not there was a recent outfall that they had to release data from, release sewage. So these reports are traditionally in a PDF document. And by working with the local city, the local group that actually issues that report, they basically convince them that instead of putting it in a PDF, is to just keep it in a spreadsheet and then share the spreadsheet itself. So this gets updated, I think, every 1 week or every 2 weeks, and people can look back at on the map and see what sections of the water was affected, and just have a general, kind of a better understanding of what's the history of their own city. So using technology as a way to, I wouldn't say trick, but kind of start with something that's a value up front, like the environment or the concern for your own community, and then also teach you something that you may not have known. The Chicago River was reversed. So this particular portal, the website? Yep, Open City Apps. Open City Apps. Now there's a lot of organizations that are doing this work as well, so don't take just one of these. for being the only one, but there's a lot of interesting things that you're going to be able to yield from public data. So this probably looks pretty cool with these big TVs. This is called Edifice. This was built, I think, 2 years ago. These are actually every building colored by footprint area. So down at the right here, the teal color is a 0 to 100 meters squared. Purple is 1,000 meters squared. More like a magenta is 10,000 meters squared. The reddish is 100,000 meters squared, and the bright red is 100,000 plus meters squared. So the footprint, how large the ground is basically taking up public space, and all this data is public already available. They just had to put it in a format that revealed some useful information. But if it's just buildings, that isn't going to tell you anything. How about a map of the demolitions? So where things are being demolished in Chicago. So if you were going to be moving there, or if you're a developer, or if you were interested in the nightlife there, this would be a big indicator of what was happening in the next year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. These are all violations of some sort, so building violations issued by city, and you could really dig into this and see certain areas that they have a pattern, and then this is construction, so it gives you a heat map. And this is pretty interesting, right? I mean, it may not look like much, but this tells a story. It tells a lot about what exists, what doesn't exist, and if people had a better idea of what was around them, then we would have a better shared idea of our realities, right? A lot of people don't know, different people experience cities in a lot of different ways. So here's a project that was created in Vermont where you put in your zip code, and if you're looking to donate food, it gives you a directory of places to donate that have been pre-screened. So some of this is about lowering the bar for volunteerism, for engagement. How could you make it easier to do the thing that maybe you were looking to do and it took you 10 steps to get to the volunteering step? How could you make it easier for other people? So that was Edifice that I shared earlier. This is a little bit more deeper. This is about, this is a project in Santa Cruz. This is what it looks like to start a business in Santa Cruz. So literally going from, this is how you're going to start a business. Do you know what you need to know about zoning, about placing your business? Some of the things you may be able to check off your list right off the bat are basically stuff that you should know if you have a general idea of what you want to start, but you may not get that step until 50 pages into the application process for a business. So they're trying to make this a little bit easier in terms of knowing your costs with your time. Has anyone tried to file a business permit or start a business in the city before? Was it an easy process? It probably wasn't very clear, or maybe it took more than one step. This is trying to make it easier enough because really the lifeblood of the city is based on how many people are starting new business, how many people are choosing to stay there. But it doesn't always have to be so serious, right? It's not always about starting businesses or stopping the plague or something. Maybe you could make a small difference in your own meaningful way. So this is a tool called Cuties in Boston. So this is actually on github.com. So if you know how to code, you can fork this project right now and be able to set something up that uses the Broward shelter data. If you go to the Humane Society's website, they post pictures every day of the animals up for adoption with a description. Basically what this does is it scrapes the local directory, it grabs the images of the animals that are up for adoption from the internet, and then posts them out on social media. So if people are following this Cuties in Boston handle throughout their day, they maybe get updates of animals that are up for adoption or things that they can do to make an impact in their own community. This is the GitHub repository, so if you know code, this is basically the starting point to recreating something that already exists. So you'll hear me reiterate that throughout the night. Is the civic mentality around open source code is you don't need to recreate the wheel here. Find a project that already exists, that's already working, that's making an impact somewhere else, and see if you can copy it or duplicate it and create it here. I can name off the top of my head 4 or 5 projects that other cities have, that other groups are working on, that we as South Florida or Broward or even the state of Florida could really be improved with. So these are a couple of the other projects that I wanted to share that try to just change the dynamic about how people interact with civic information or government information. So this is, let me just search that actually, it's supposed to be a GIF, but it's not loading. So Street Mix, what came out of a Code for America fellowship, where they were making it easy for people to redesign their own streets. So what would your ideal street look like? So they can take this to middle schools, high schools, and they can ask kids to redesign the streets. You can drag and drop or change the items that you want. So maybe I don't want any cars, I want all trams and open streets. And you can redesign your own street, drag and drop the things that you like, and then when you want to rename it, you just type in what you would like. And then what the idea was that they would be sending this to the city, the local city representation, to say this is actually what your constituents are looking for in terms of civic design. And what's hilarious about it is that unwittingly you're learning about the steps in which cities have to be designed by. How wide can the buses be? How wide can the street lanes be? All these different ways of measuring the environment. That is actually the nitty-gritty parts of the city that most people don't want to think about. Is why they choose to put that big overpass over here and not over there. Maybe there was zoning rules related to it. Maybe there was other things that the common folk isn't currently aware of. So this is a pretty cool project as well that I wanted to recommend. So keep going here. So it's an interesting side note here. The co-organizer for the group, Ryan Gates, couldn't make it tonight. He's actually hosting an event tomorrow night at Ultimate Software over at Weston. So he's hosting the Hack Night there. If you ever want to attend, you're more than welcome to. He worked on a project for one of his first ideas was he wanted to use this budget data from the city of Fort Lauderdale to better understand spending, like how money goes into a city and then goes out. I can actually bring that up real quick. Let me just show you. So he worked on this budget visualization. So this is his first attempt at d3.js. It's a visualization library, if you don't know. It's really useful, and it does has a lot of cool templates that you can play with if you want to like data visualize and do stuff like that. So D3 is definitely cool. So he worked on this one. And all of it started basically with an email, because we didn't have any data about the budget. How many people have ever looked at the city's budget or any information related to a budget spreadsheet? It's not very useful. I mean, it's usually giant spreadsheets, has like columns, and if you don't really know what you're looking at, I mean, I still don't know how he managed to discern, but I do know that what he ended up doing was emailing the community board that exists. Most people don't realize that there's community boards for a bunch of different topics. It could be the environment, it could be public health. One of them happened to be the budget for the city of Fort Lauderdale. And what Ryan did is he just cold emailed one of the people that were on this budget committee and said, hi, I'm interested in visualizing and trying to figure out how the budget looks visually. Can you send me a file? And the next day, she emailed him a CSV spreadsheet of the budget. He still needed to figure out how that was set up and what it looked like, but going back and forth a little bit, he learned more about it, and he created this, which is a pretty interesting step for someone that has never used any visualization stuff before. But what it shows is the outlay of how money comes in, how it gets allocated and then spent. And the original CSV file could be here, you can find it here. The budget itself was, this is how they removed it. But this is what the budget section, I'm not even sure if it'll show up here. So the budget for the city, then maybe a couple weeks later. So this is what they released. So this is the official budget that gets released in PDF form. As you can see, it takes a little time to load, so you're not going to likely look at this on your mobile device. But they have a nice rich document here that shows you all this good stuff about how they're going to be spending the taxpayers' money and about our priorities for the next 10, 15 years. Some stuff that really the entire community should be aware of. Do you know what the goals are for the place that you live? What they think is important? Who they think they should be serving? It's important to have somewhat of a community check in place. I'm not even sure if it's going to load. Oh, there it goes. So it's a pretty big document, but once you get down into the spreadsheets, oh, there's some pie charts. So that tells you some things. But basically, someone would have to go through all of this to just get to an idea of where the money is spent. Right here, this is all taxable money that comes in. So Ryan learned more about the city through this experience, and then ended up setting up that version of it. And then 2 weeks later, the city of Fort Lauderdale paid OpenGov.com, a startup outside of OpenGov.com. It's like a Silicon Valley startup type of thing. They paid them to host the budget data that Ryan asked for via email, and ended up creating an actual, let me see if it still says customers, Fort Lauderdale. City of Fort Lauderdale. So the Fort Lauderdale version, OpenGov.com. You can actually click through and see a little bit more dynamic information instead of Ryan's chart. But what I do think what happened was that because Ryan was contacting a couple of city officials about getting the data, it also put kind of their feet to the fire that people are interested, or at least we know one person is definitely interested in accessing budget data. How else can we make it more useful? And they said this was in the pipeline, but because of Ryan and a couple other people's requests for better use of the data, more useful interpretations of it, they paid for this and then they released this. So you can see a little bit more about how much money is spent within different operations. If you have questions, they give you a breakdown of certain things. It still needs a little bit more interpretation, but it's a good step in the right direction. So just to kind of recap here before we jump into the workshop, there's a lot of things in your community that could use better insights. How many people know what 311 is, or 211? 311? Do you want to explain what 311 is?
311 is for public information, not
Yeah, so So it's the non-emergency line for public information. So if you have an idea of how many people are calling the city for whatever reason, you actually have a really good idea of what are the needs in the community, because these are non-emergency services, but still they need information about certain things, whether it's trash pickup or before a hurricane. 311 gets overloaded with information about shelter information, open closes times, all these different things. So 211 is a similar thing to like the non-emergency line for Broward. And what they do is they publish their data, but it's in a big spreadsheet like this. So if more people actually knew the types of things that were happening, how many people are speaking different languages that are calling for services, we would have a wider view, right, a wider perspective about what are the needs in the community. So with better ways to visualize stuff like this, so everyday folks could look at this document and then see the people behind it that are calling, asking for help, and stuff like that. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into data. So if you brought your computers, you can go to this web address, and I'll follow along as well, and I'll show a little bit about what you can do with police data. So this is actually the Fort Lauderdale Police Department portal, data portal. So we talked about Chicago's data portal. The city of Fort Lauderdale is what is Orlando, and a couple other cities, I think it was about a dozen or 2 dozen, were part of the White House Open Data Initiative related to police data. So last year and the beginning of this year, a bunch of police departments that were already basically agreed to, as part of the Obama administration, to release data about police department interactions with communities and put it in a data portal of some sort so other people can then do better analysis on it. Fort Lauderdale was one of those cities, and you can actually browse a bunch of data about interactions in Fort Lauderdale. So things like incidents, calls for service, arrests, citations, accidents, and employee data. So some of the stuff you think is kind of over the line. All the personally identifiable information is removed, of course, so you can't tell person's names associated with an arrest or an accident, but you can do higher level kind of analysis around incidences or locations of incidences, different things like this. So what you can do with it, so once you have the data, so let me just go FLA. So when the Fort Lauderdale Police Department was releasing this data, they had a little get-together event at the Broward County Library, and for 12 hours, a couple folks worked on projects that were trying to visualize that data. So myself and 2 other people created this little visualization that shows you all of the calls for service. So as you can see, there's an outline, which is the boundary of Fort Lauderdale. That's actually where the calls for service registry mark line, so they don't do any calls for service outside that line. But what this is an example of all of the calls for service. So all those little dots, that's each month. So this is February for the year 2016, this March. So all those calls will show you that there's activity constantly happening in the city. Like thousands and thousands of people are constantly asking the city to do more for them. This is the burglaries by neighborhood. So each color there shows you a different neighborhood that was being burglarized or reported as burglarized. And that was just in 1 month, that last flick. There's March. So it's on a chronological order. It shows you a little bit more about the place. So then this is just some of the stuff that you can get out of that data set from the police department. Employee residents by gender. You also see how sporadic they are spread, the employees for the city of Fort Lauderdale's police department. Like there's people that live up in Lantana that are the employees of the Fort Lauderdale Police Department, which is kind of an interesting, I wouldn't think that someone lives in Lantana but works for the city of Fort Lauderdale. There's also people that work way down or live way down in Lakes by the Bay or Palmetto Estates or Olympia Heights, that sometimes you think like, wow, you can't get people in our own backyard to police, but maybe there's some thinking behind that I'm not aware of. So if you wanted to jump back into data sets, so let me know if you're following along and you're trying to do one of these workshops. You want to just raise your hand, just let me know. Okay, so a few people here are trying to. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to that fortlauderdale.data.zacata.com website, and then you're also going to want to create a Carto account. So carto.com is a really useful mapping tool that literally anyone, any age can do. You'll need to sign in or sign up if you don't have an account. This may look a little different if I'm signed into the right account. Yeah. So this is what the Carto dashboard looks like. It's just a little window into the map creation tool. And cartography, it's all about creating maps. So this is pretty cool if you don't know about Carto already. It gives you a lot of places to search. So it already has a pre-installed library, so you can actually see a bunch of people, what other people are using. So if there's a really good data set that's already in existence, that has been well documented or organized, Carto will align it here, and you could do things like map the health areas of New York, or the police precincts, or health centers, or census tracts, all these different things that already exist in the Carto dashboard if you wanted to map these. But to start, I'm just going to go into a little bit about how easy it is just to get an idea of what's happening in your own community. So what should we look up? Anyone interested in seeing a certain type of statistic for the Fort Lauderdale region? No? Car crashes, or drug arrests, or dog assistance, drug arrests? Or look drugs up? Okay, let's look at some drugs. I know we don't support any drug use or anything, so don't... So let me see here, arrests. So the hardest part in terms of this data set is filtering to get a cleaner set of data or a more narrowed set of data, because there's a lot of records. Whether it's arrests or incidences, there's just a ton of information. So as you can see, there may be something going wrong with their uploader tool. All these fields are blank, it looks like. But there is data down here related to certain charged with topics. So if you wanted to filter a little bit, what type of topic do we want to filter by here? Fraud? Probably a lot. I don't know if it would be an arrest record if you get arrested for fraud, but yeah, is it under fraud though, or is it? Do you want to look this? Okay, so we'll go to the Fs. Oh, very past the Fs. Yeah. So that's the other part, right? So you start to go into their police department, right? You start to learn more about the specifics and how do they classify crime, right? And not many people are wondering that in their average jobs, but in terms of this filtering, right? Look at the types of trespassing there are, right? So there's trespassing occupied structure, trespassing fail to leave a property on ordering by an owner. So that's someone telling you to get off their property and then you're not moving or something. Trespassing after a warning structure, so you start to learn much more about like the legal system accidentally just by kind of being curious about the way that this is broken down. So a lot of drug stuff here, so we can search one of those if we want, or you're going to look at frauds. Oh, there we go. So fraud imprisonment, which one can we check? The fraud less than $300. That seems like a minor one. Let's go for the other one for now. Okay, so this gave us all the frauds. So that's a large set, it looks like. So if we wanted to filter by date and time, for example, we can sort it for last months or last breakdowns like that. That's what I'm going to filter back with. Here we go, that's the most recent. So not super often. So if I did a filter for a set of time over here, so this is the other part of it, is to be able to make use of some of these tools. Oh. St. Patrick's Day, should we check? So we got 2 there, but let's go back further. Not many are coming out. There we go, so there's a couple more. So that's all since January 1st, that's all of the fraud, imprisonment, arrest related to it. So all you need to do now, so once we have our filter set, if you're following along, you're trying to find a smaller view of the set of data, all you need to do now is click the blue export button, then bam, you click on CSV, and you'll notice at the bottom left down here, arrest file was downloaded. So at this point, all you need to do is move back over to Carto, and then to add the data set, you just drag and drop the data. Bam, there it is. Connect data set. So now it's working its magic down here. And what it's doing is it's reviewing all of the files that we just downloaded from that police set, right? So that public database that existed that had the records of the police department stuff, we're downloading it, and now it's going to review it, and it says, okay, how can we make this useful? Unfortunately, it doesn't know where to map it, right? How does it know where it's located? If we go back into the arrest record here, we scroll over, it says a street name. So we have a street name, but no other specific location. But what they do put here is the XY coordinates. So right here, you see GOX and GOY. That gives us the locations of the incidences. So with that in mind, we go ahead and go back to our map. And let me know if I'm going too fast here. I've done this a couple times. So once you have those Latin longs, you go ahead and type in geo. So which one is which? Who knows? Latitude and longitude. GOX, GOY. Oh, I don't think that's right. I think GOX is flat. And GOY. There's only one way to check though. Is to put it together and then test it. And then you just click apply. And then try to get back to the data somehow. Whoop. And as you can see, on that, see the tour. No, I don't want to see the tour. As you can see back in the bottom there, see the little dot on Florida? Those are our arrest records. So, and it doesn't look like much, but that's the start of the mapping that has to take place before we know what happened in those incidences. So if we want to see, in this example, what does this tell us? Who knows what happened here? It just says blah. Just says, look, this is a list of things that happened. I mean, you're not going to really, unless you know the city really well, you're not going to be able to look at the street addresses and be like, oh, I know what happened here. This was in next to the bars downtown, and that's what's happening. So at this point, when you have at least this better insight, you can have a much better idea of what actually went down, what the area was, and then if you wanted to have a time dimension to it, you can also change that and see. So as you noticed, all the little dots there, we can make those a little bigger. So this is the Carto editor tool. It's all really user-friendly. And then right now it doesn't tell you anything, so if you wanted to actually have an info window, you would be able to click here and then some information would pop up, like the information related to the date and time, what it was charged with. See how you can create maps? So you start with the spreadsheet, you start with the data that's provided by the state or the city, and then you import it into visualization tools like Carto. And what's important here is the power that this holds is unbelievable. Like we just took, what, 15 minutes to visualize the last 3 months of arrest records. That's pretty interesting, I think. And that's like the first step, right? Because this is only the use for the police data, right? If you actually wanted to see how this could also be used, there's one project called Open Disclosure out of Oakland that if you're interested in elections, how elections are financed, right? That's in some cases, that's all public data. You just have to figure out how the spreadsheet is structured, how the columns are labeled, and then learn more about the campaign finance and election system. If you don't know, money buys influence. I mean, we can all agree about that, right? So knowing how money flows in the electoral process, I think is now becoming more influential than ever. I mean, if you're not following right now what's happening with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, it is amazing. I mean, $180 million was spent in Facebook ads. Think about how much money that is. And some of the groups that were using data improperly and all these different things, it's coming to light, like how much of money is a key player in whether or not we know if elected officials are being influenced by outside people or even internal people from within our own government, our own lobbying industries. Like who carries weight? It's who spends the money. So the real question now we have is how can we better understand how money is being collected and allocated? You can see that a little bit better, hopefully. Zooming in here. So what this is a nice mobile-friendly page that the Open Oakland group, so the same group, just like meeting down here, that collaborate on projects, they got all the data related to the election, and they put it in this nice little chart, but the real powerful thing here is this map. So you can see by zip code which candidate raised the most money. And then if you wanted to see, based on the actual data, where the money came from, you can get an idea of, did the person that just ran for office and won raise money from within the community or from outside the community? That's impactful stuff. So just being able to click through some of these, you can see how it kind of floats across. This is just for the Bay Area, so San Francisco on the left, Oakland on the right. And then in some cases, what's really great is seeing other avenues, right? Like other frames. So chronologically over time. How long did it take for this person to raise money? Was it a long, steady, slow pace from lots of small dollars that took a lot of time because it was growing kind of virally, or was it more of like a rapid, all of a sudden you met someone that had a bunch of money, you collected it all, or you were in some kind of loud or inflammatory thing that got a lot of attention, and then it was donated, you raised a lot of money, someone came. I mean, it's funny because look at the purple thing, what happened to that purple one? Look at that straight shot at the very end of the election. So they appeared 4 months out, 5 months out from the end of the election, and then all of a sudden, bam, shot up, what is that, $400,000 in election spending, or in money raised. That gives you a breakdown. All this already exists, right? Like this is the access we get as living in a democracy in America. We get, in some cases, access to the money that's spent. The question now we have as technologists especially, can we argue for machine readable access to this? should all of the FEC information, the federal election information, be an API, right? A machine-readable endpoint that if you have coding skills, you should be able to, right now, after the local Fort Lauderdale election, should we have a spreadsheet of all of those casted ballots? I would say so. I think we're going to need this auditing to have much more trust in our community and the process that we have. Because right now I can see a lot of people do not trust our process. You see all this data is available. You just have to find where the data exists. So yeah, I think that kind of covers how fast you can make some change, visualize some data, ask good questions, reach out to some of the elected officials. How many people, quick question, if we're all still awake here, how many people know who their mayor is? Oh, look around, we got 2 people in this entire room that know who our own mayor is. Change happens local, unless we know who our mayor is. Like this is a funny thing because I always ask that, because most people don't know who their mayor is. But we made a little tool, at least in Broward here, just to map that information. So we Googled it, and then on Carto actually, you saw Carto.com that we just used. This is the exact same tool. Uses the boundary data from the city, and then we just have a spreadsheet with everyone's image file, and you scroll over and you can see what area the mayor serves and the different groups and how you can contact them. And this the election just happened, so we need to update some of these, but this was made in a weekend. We just did a Google spreadsheet with the information and said, okay, let's just knock this out. And over a weekend, we just kind of spent an hour here, an hour there. Here's the image for this, and here's the image for this file. And yeah, things can happen much more fast than you think if you have a couple people, 2 or 3 people is all you need. Have an end goal in mind and find someone on the inside that can fight for the data or for the help that you want. So if you have any other questions, this is links to our information. If you want to join our Slack channel, it's a group conversation tool that we use to keep in touch about project ideas, data source ideas. Other links that are pretty good in here, the Code for Austin group created a project canvas. That's like the Lean Startup Canvas, if you know Eric Rees' Lean Startup Canvas, the way to test ideas or prototype ideas, instead of having all your eggs in one basket and assuming that you know the end user's use case, or saying like, I know what the end person is going to need, right? Instead, actually starting out with just a mock-up, some ideas on paper, and going to talk to people, and actually questioning your assumptions about what you think you knew about the thing. So being that this is all civic technology and civics related, I have to say, like homelessness will never be solved by like an application, right? Why? Like, is it an application on all smartphones? Do a lot of people that are on the streets have smartphones? You have to think about the need versus the technology, how you would deliver it, right? So there has to be kind of like a meet between how you think people in a situation are and then how they actually are. Because unless you have first-hand experience applying for food stamps, let's not assume that you know how to make the food stamp process improved, right? Like you have to learn from the people that are on the ground, in the trenches, maybe applying for food stamps. So one side note here, we do a little blog on Medium, and I want to tell a story of Paul. So Paul Sr. was one of our attendees who attended maybe 2 years ago and then fell off for like 2 or 3 months, and I wasn't sure what happened. And it turned out he had lost his job, and unfortunately he was really like struggling looking for work. And in the meantime, he was having to apply for food stamps in the state of Florida. Never had done that before. He was in a position where he didn't know what to do. He had 2 kids that were in college, so in certain ways he wasn't qualified for food stamps, in other ways he was. So he had to kind of like navigate this really arduous process to figure out what he needed. Finally, he got through to the end. It took him like a month and a half or a month or something, but he started to get the debit card basically with the balance renewed. But he realized he had a problem, which was the 2nd or 3rd month in, he realized that the date changes for when your balance gets deposited or when you get notified of your balance. So you can't really plan on like, I'm going to go to the grocery store on a Thursday because I know my balance will be renewed on the day before. So we wrote this story up by, if you want to read more about how he found out the idea for this, he ended up doing some background research, learning more about how they calculate the structure for the schedule for the disbursement, interesting. They have like this sheet basically that says, depending on the last digit of your case number, it changes. That's actually what signifies it. It's the last 4 digits of your number. How do you get that number? It gets automated into a system. So that's Paul. So he actually worked on this project for a few months and ended up, I thought the link was in here somewhere. Oh, it's at the very top. What was I thinking? So what he created was this little tool. So now anyone in Florida can now enter in their 9-digit code and hit submit, and it'll spit out the date at which your balance gets renewed, and it changes each month. So when you change these digits, the date changes. And it's literally just that little sheet that you saw, this document here, outlining the chart. So he encoded that into a little JavaScript tool that you would put in the text, and it spit out the answer. And he was learning as he did. He's not a professional programmer. He was tinkering on the side, using free code camp materials and stuff like that. And he built his own tool. He was solving his own problem first. So I think that's the note that I wanted to finish on, is just make sure that you're looking at yourself first, at things that you can improve for your own issues, your own challenges, before thinking that technology is going to be the end-all, be-all answer. Technology is like the means for the end goal, which is to make sure that our services are reaching the right people, that we're communicating the right things, that we're including the right people in the discovery process or in the building process. And especially in the terms of civic tech, like we have a huge opportunity to make these changes, right? Like this brigade network that exists here, this, bless you. So this brigade network, don't take this group lightly, right? Like there's some heavy hitters in here. The people that exist in this group, you can find online and communicate with them, ping them a message, and they will gladly indulge in your ideas and sharing feedback. And the best thing is go copy projects. Find projects in other cities, like the Cuties in Boston, or some of the projects in Chicago, or San Francisco has a ton of projects. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you think you may be able to already start making improvements.